Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making the audiobook series. Salahuddin al-Ayubi, Volume 2, The Establishment of the Ayyubid State. Start of Part 5 of Chapter 4. The faqeeh Eesa al-Hakari. His full name was ad-Deen Abu Muhammad Eesa ibn Muhammad ibn Eesa al-Hakari, one of the emirs of Salahuddin's state, on whom the Sultan was relying for advice and consultation. He taught fiqh in al-Madrasa al-Zujajiyya in the city of Aleppo. He contacted the Emir Asad-ad-Din Shirkuh, the paternal uncle of Salahuddin, and became his imam, leading him in the 5 obligatory prayers. When Asad ad-Din went to Egypt and became the vizier, Eesa accompanied him. Salahuddin used to consult him and follow his advice, and he was so close to him that he talked to him in a manner that no one else could. His intermediation between Salahuddin and the people was in their interests. His support for Salahuddin's viziership. After Salahuddin was appointed vizier by the Caliph al-Adid, some of the emirs of Nuruddin who had wanted the viziership for themselves objected to that and refused to obey Salahuddin or serve under him. The situation almost led to conflict among Nuruddin's forces in Egypt, were it not for the role played by the faqeeh Eesa al-Hakari, who was one of the Kurdish. He began to strive hard to unite these emirs around Salahuddin, using all kinds of incentives and punishments. But Ayatollah al-Yaruqi preferred to go back to Syria to serve Nuruddin Mahmud, rather than serve under Salahuddin's authority. Thus the great role played by the faqeeh Eesa al-Hakari in supporting Salahuddin in his viziership becomes clear. By means of his strength of character and smartness, he was able to pave the way for Salahuddin when he was first appointed, so that he could devote his energy to that which was more important than these conflicts, namely the greater jihad against the Crusaders. Resolving the misunderstanding between Salahuddin and Nuruddin. It is due to Sheikh Eesa al-Hakari that the misunderstanding between Salahuddin and the Sultan Nuruddin Mahmud was resolved. When Salahuddin excused himself from marching to the fortress of Kirak, as Nuruddin commanded him to do, Nuruddin accepted the intervention of al-Hakari and gave him a letter to take to Salahuddin, in which he stated, "Protecting Egypt is more important to us than anything else." Salahuddin relied on him with regard to many matters, such that al-Faqih Eesa became one of the greatest emirs of Salahuddin. The latter respected his knowledge, wisdom, and advice. He consulted him a great deal with regard to matters of ruling, and never went against what he advised. His role in reaching a peace deal with the people of Mosul. After that, events unfolded which confirmed the importance and status of this faqih in the state of Salahuddin al-Ayubi. That became clear in 578 Hijri, that is 1182 Common Era, when Salahuddin wanted to besiege Mosul and take it back from its ruler, the Atabek Izz-ad-Din Masud, and incorporate it into the Islamic front, in order to guarantee that it would stand with him against the Crusaders in his decisive battle with them. But after many clashes between the two sides, the Abbasid Caliph intervened and sent Sadr ad-Din, the Sheikh of Sheikhs, as an intermediary acting on his behalf, to bring about a reconciliation between the two sides. Sadr ad-Din sent word to Salahuddin, asking him to send some of his most trusted men to attend peace talks between the two sides. The Sultan requested al-Qadi al-Fadil and al-Faqih Eesa to attend and inform him of what they heard from Sadr ad-Din. So they went and met with the Sheikh of Sheikhs, and both of them discussed the matter on behalf of Salahuddin, until a deal was reached between the two sides, and Salahuddin lifted the siege from Mosul, and Muslim blood was thus spared. Negotiations with the Vizier of Khallat. In 581 Hijri, that is 1185 Common Era, Al-Faqih Eesa undertook another diplomatic mission, when the Sultan Salahuddin al-Ayubi sent him to negotiate with the Vizier of Khallat on his behalf. After the death of Shah Arman Sakman, the ruler of Khallat, his Mamluk Saifuddin Baiktamar took over the city, and al-Bahlawan, the Atabeg of Shamsuddin Muhammad ibn al-Dakas, the ruler of Persia, marched towards him to seize Khallat from him. The Vizier of Khallat, whose name was Majduddin ibn al-Muwaffaq ibn Rashid, was also hoping to take over the city. He sent word to the Sultan Salahuddin al-Ayubi, asking him to intervene and put an end to these conflicts. The Sultan sent al-Faqih Eesa al-Hakari on this diplomatic mission, to hold discussions with all sides. The Vizier of Khallat spoke with al-Faqih Eesa, asking him to hasten the arrival of the Sultan before al-Bahlawan arrived. In fact, the Sultan had left Mosul and was on his way to Khallat when al-Bahlawan found out about these developments and the determined stance adopted by al-Faqih Eesa in support of the Vizier of Khallat and his urgent message to the Sultan. Al-Bahlawan became afraid and sought a peace deal with the Vizier of Khallat so that he could return to his own country. A peace deal was made and an end was put to the conflict by means of the wisdom of al-Faqih Eesa, who succeeded in this mission and opened the door to friendly relations between the two sides. A man of special missions. In 582 Hijri, that is 1186 Common Era, the Sultan Salahuddin made a number of changes in Egypt and Syria, especially with regard to his deputies in various cities. He was seeking reassurance about the future of the land after his death on the one hand, and he wanted no disputes among his sons. In addition, he wished to train them in how to run the country during his lifetime, and to protect the land from division on the other hand, especially since he was preparing himself to enter into a decisive battle in his jihad against the Crusaders. When news reached him that his nephew Taqi-ad-Din Umar, his deputy in Egypt along with his son al-Malik al-Afzal, had behaved in a manner which suggested that he wanted to gain full control in Egypt during his uncle's sickness, when the latter was in Haran, he sent al-Faqih Eesa al-Hakari, who was held in high esteem by his nephew and was obeyed by the troops, to Egypt, and ordered him to expel Taqi-ad-Din from that land and stay there himself. Al-Faqih Eesa hastened to obey the command and headed for Egypt to carry out these orders. He stayed there until Al-Adil, the brother of Salahuddin, arrived, accompanied by his son Al-Aziz Usman ibn Salahuddin. This is indicative of the great trust that Salahuddin had in al-Faqih Eesa al-Hakari, and the extent to which he felt at ease with him, especially since he knew how great an influence al-Hakari had on the troops of Egypt. His courage in the wars against the Crusaders. After things settled down, Salahuddin started his jihad on the Syrian front, joined by many volunteers among the fuqaha and ulama. foremost among whom was al-Faqih Eesa al-Hakari, who took part in his jihad against the Crusaders in practical terms, bearing weapons and fighting in battle as a fighter for the sake of Allah, wearing military dress with the turban of a faqih, and thus combining the two styles of dress. The Islamic sources prove this practical participation of this faqih in jihad. When he went out with Salahaddin in 573 Hijri, that is 1177 Common Era, to fight the Crusaders at Ascalon, he raided it, killed many Crusaders, took many prisoners and burnt everything around it. Salahaddin continued with his entourage until he reached Ramla, where he captured many prisoners and seized a lot of booty. Then when the army was distracted by the booty and scattered in the villages and areas around the city, and Salahaddin stayed behind with a small number of his troops, the Crusaders launched a sudden attack, and the Muslims got confused. They began fighting, but they were defeated, and many of them were killed or taken prisoner, and al-Faqih ad-Deen Eesa al-Hakari and his brother Zahir ad-Din were among those who were taken captive. Ibn al-Athir mentions with regard to this matter that he was one of those who fought the hardest on that day. One sign of the high esteem in which al-Faqih Eesa al-Hakari was held by Salahaddin al-Ayubi, which was mentioned by the historians, is the fact that Salahaddin ransomed him from captivity 2 years later for the sum of 60,000 dinars. The historians add that not only did Salahaddin pay money to ransom al-Faqih al-Hakari, he also released a large number of knights hospitaller, whom he was holding captive. This is indicative of the great esteem in which al-Faqih al-Hakari was held by Sultan Salahaddin al-Ayubi. Al-Faqih Eesa died in 858 Hijri. Zayn ad-Din Ali ibn Naja. With regard to the attitudes and actions of some of the jurisprudents and ulama at the beginning of the Ayyubid state, it is worth mentioning the great keenness they showed in 569 Hijri, that is 1174 Common Era, for the soundness and security of the state, and their eagerness for it not to become divided, lest the enemies of Islam and the Muslims should get their hopes up. That was seen when some of the Shiite in Egypt engaged in a conspiracy aimed at restoring the Fatimid Caliphate after it had been toppled by Salahaddin in 567 Hijri, that is 1171 Common Era. Their plan was to summon the Crusaders from Sicily and Syria to come to Egypt and help them in return for money and land. Their plan was that when the Crusader forces arrived and Salahaddin went out to meet them, the conspirators would light the fires of revolt in the land, and the Sultan would then be caught between two traps, internal revolt and the Crusader attack from outside, which would scatter his forces along two fronts and lead to his defeat by the Crusaders on one hand, and the conspirators who were seeking to gain control on the other. Foremost among these conspirators were the Shiite faqih and poet, Ammar ibn Abil Hasan al-Yamani, Abd al-Samad al-Katib, al-Qadi Hibatullah ibn Abdullah al-Awairis, and others among the Egyptian troops, black soldiers, and the palace retinue, in addition to some of the emirs and troops of Salahaddin. Undoubtedly, these plans were a blatant act of betrayal on the part of some of the Shiite, who sought the help of the Crusaders to fight the Muslims in order to achieve personal gains, and to undermine the Sunni Islamic State of Salahaddin, which was fighting the enemies of the faith. This betrayal even went so far as enticing the Crusaders with offers of money to come to Egypt, instead of confronting and fighting them. But Allah willed that the conspiracy should be uncovered at the hands of a cleric, one of the smart and sincere jurisprudents who understood where the interest of Islam lay, and who cared about the unity of the Islamic front. His name was Zayn ad-Din Ali. Ibn al-Athir tells us, by the kindness of Allah towards the Muslims, the Egyptian group asked Zayn ad-Din Ali ibn Naja, the preacher and Qadi who was known as Ibn Najiyah, to join them. They appointed a caliph, vizier, preacher, and judges. When al-Qadi ibn Naja joined them and realized the seriousness of what they were trying to achieve, he told Salahaddin all the details of the conspiracy. Salahaddin asked him to make a show of sympathy with them and to go along with whatever they wanted him to do, and to keep him up to date with what was going on. He did that and kept him informed of everything they were up to. Based on that, Salahaddin managed to find out the details of the conspiracy. When an envoy from the Frankish king of the coast came with a gift and a letter, he appeared outwardly to be coming to Salahaddin, but secretly he had come with a message to that group. He sent some of the Christians to them, and their messenger came to him. News had reached Salahaddin from the Frankish lands of what was going on, so he appointed a Christian whom he trusted to spend time with that messenger and keep an eye on him, and the messenger told that Christian man exactly what was going on. When Salahaddin was certain of the veracity of the reports he was receiving from al-Qadi ibn Naja, and with the aim of averting disaster before it was too late, he ordered the arrest and execution of all those conspirators, and thus the conspiracy was silenced. Then the Sultan brought Zayn ad-Din Ali ibn Naja close to him and treated him kindly, awarding him gifts and a stipend, and rewarded him generously, giving him all he wanted and more. The Sultan would consult him and ask his advice, and he was fond of him because he had known him for a long time and knew of his good character. Salahaddin called Ibn Naja Amr ibn al-As and followed his advice because of his wisdom and smartness. Many of the state officials and prominent Sunnis in Egypt would not go against the advice of Zayn ad-Din ibn Naja. Al-Malik al-Aziz Uthman ibn Salahaddin said to him, "If you have any idea that could achieve something good, then write it for me, for I will not do anything other than what you advise." Sibt ibn al-Jawzi stated that Ibn Najah became active in preaching and teaching the Hadith, and that Salahaddin and his children used to attend his audiences and listen to his exhortations, and he had high status and was well respected. When Salahaddin went out to fight the Crusaders in Syria, he used to send letters to Zayn ad-Din ibn Najah describing events. For example, when he conquered the citadel of Homs in 570 Hijri, that is 1174 Common Era, he wrote to him describing the citadel in a lengthy letter. When Salahaddin decided to settle in Syria in 580 Hijri, that is 1184 Common Era, Ibn Najjar wrote him a letter trying to evoke nostalgia in him for Egypt with its Nile, goodness, mosques, and historical sites. Then he mentioned the virtues of Egypt, quoting as evidence Quranic verses, reports, and literary passages. Salahaddin responded with a letter, which was quoted by Sibt ibn al-Jawzi and Abu Shamah, in which he told him that living in Syria was better, and that its climate was more pleasant, and that Allah has sworn by it in the Quran. He rebuked him for not longing for his homeland of Damascus, and invited him to move there. Then he ended his letter with the words, "May Allah guide Zayn ad-Din." He mentioned Syria but was not content for Syria to be equal to other lands. Rather, he started to list its disadvantages. I hope that he and the people around him will come back to the truth, if Allah wills. Whatever the case, Ibn Najjar continued to work with Salahaddin until he entered Jerusalem with him as a conqueror and gave the first lesson in al-Masjid al-Aqsa, as we shall see below insha'Allah. Abul Hasan Ali ibn Ibrahim ibn Naja al-Hanbali, who was known as Zayn ad-Deen, died in 599 Hijri. Imad ad-Din al-Isfahani. The Qadi, Imam, great scholar, Mufti, Chancellor and Vizier, Imad ad-Din Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Hamid ibn Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Ali ibn Mahmud ibn Hibat al-Isfahani, the scribe, came to Baghdad and stayed at An-Nizamiyah, where he excelled in fiqh, studying under Abu Mansur Sa'id ibn al-Razzaz. He became proficient in Arabic and was top of the class in the art of letter writing. He wrote many books and became famous. He made contact with Ibn Hubayra. Then he went to Damascus in 562 Hijri, where he made contact with the state officials and worked in the chancery of al-Malik Nuruddin. He wrote in Farsi too, and Nuruddin sent him as an envoy to al-Mustanjid and appointed him to teach in al-Imadiyah in 567 Hijri. Then he employed him in the department. After Nuruddin died, he was neglected, so he went to Mosul where he fell sick. Then he came back to Aleppo when it was being besieged by Salahaddin in 570 Hijri. He praised him and joined his retinue. Then Salahaddin appointed him as a scribe and brought him close to him. Al-Qadi al-Fadil would stay in Egypt to do some tasks, and al-Imad would act in his stead. Al-Imad became Al-Qadi al-Fadil's assistant in all his affairs, and he regained his old status, becoming the confidential scribe of Salahaddin. Salahaddin appointed him as his scribe, trusted him and brought him close, and he became one of his inner circle, making decisions, sharing out the wealth that the Sultan gave to him, signing what the Sultan signed without consulting him, meeting the needs of the people who came to him, competing at the same level with the viziers and prominent state officials, even though he did not attain the same high status with Salahaddin as Qadi al-Fadil did. Al-Imad spent more time with Salahaddin than al-Qadi al-Fadil, who spent a lot of time away from the Sultan and stayed in Cairo and Damascus to carry out some tasks given to him by the Sultan. At the time of Salahaddin, he wrote many letters and official announcements and joined various consultative councils. When the Sultan Salahaddin died in 589 Hijri, Al-Imad's fortunes declined and his situation grew worse. The sons of Salahaddin did not treat him as their father had done, and they dismissed him from his post. Concerning that, Al-Imad commented in his introduction to Sunnah al-Barq al-Shami, when Allah the Most Generous took him unto paradise, his sons divided his kingdom, and I said to myself, they are following in his footsteps and doing what he did. They appreciate my status and will promote me to a higher rank and keep me happy. They will not undervalue me. But they disappointed me, cutting me off and casting me aside, excluding me from their lives. After the death of Salahaddin, the authors who wrote biographies of Al-Imad al-Isfahani do not mention anything about him. Yaqut said, he stayed in his home and focused on writing books and teaching people. Ibn Khali Khan stated that he stayed in his house and focused on research and writing books. It seems that after this period, Al-Imad went back to researching and writing, which is clear from the letter that Al-Qadi al-Fadil sent to him from Egypt in 595 Hijri, complaining of his life of isolation in Egypt and regarding Al-Imad's ability to focus on research and writing as a blessing for which he should be grateful. He said, Allah knows I am so isolated, but it is not the quiet corner that is recommended for the sane man at times of insanity. We are waiting for the Syrian lightning to bring rain, and definitely we will not be disappointed. The preoccupation of our master at this time with study and teaching and writing is a blessing for which scholars should give thanks and jurisprudence should feel joy. Imad died on a Monday at the beginning of Ramadan 597 Hijri, that is 5th July 1121 Common Era, and was buried in the Sufi graveyard outside Bab al-Nasr. Al-Khabooshani, the great faqeeh and ascetic, Najmuddin Abul Barakat Muhammad ibn Muwaffaq ibn Sayyid al-Khabooshani, the Shafi'i and Sufi. He studied under Muhammad ibn Yahya and excelled. He was the author of Al-Muhit, a book of 16 volumes. He was originally from Nishapur. Sultan Salahaddin brought him close to him and believed in his virtue. He was famous for his virtue, religious commitment, and sound intentions. He lived on very little and was very strong in his commitment to Islam, as he said before he went to Egypt. I shall go to Egypt and topple the kingdom of Banu Ubaid al-Yahudi, which were the Fatimids. He settled in Cairo and started to say bad things openly about the inhabitants of the palace. Reviling them became like glorifying Allah for him. They were confused about him and sent him a lot of money. It was said that the amount was 4,000 dinars, but he said to the messenger, "Woe to you! What is this innovation?" So the messenger reacted quickly and threw the gold down in front of him, but he beat him, with his turban becoming unraveled, and threw him down the stairs. When he came to Egypt in 565 Hijri, he stayed in one of the mosques, and it so happened that Caliph al-Adid li-Dinillah saw in his dream that he was in the city of Fustat, and a scorpion came out of a mosque that was known there and stung him. He woke up scared, and summoned the dream interpreter and told him what he had seen. The man said, "Harm will befall the leader of the believers from a man who is staying in that mosque." So he ordered the governor of that city to bring the man who was in that mosque. He went and brought a Sufi man to him, and al-Adid asked him where he was from, when he had come to Egypt, and what he had come for. He answered his questions without giving al-Adid any reason to suspect him. Rather, he gave him the impression that he was poor and weak but sincere. So he gave him money and said to him, "O Sheikh, pray for us," and let him go. He went back to his mosque and stayed there until Shirkuh came from Damascus, and Salahaddin Yusuf ibn Ayyub became the vizier of al-Adid and started to dismantle the state. He consulted the jurisprudence of Egypt, and his were the most severe of religious rulings. He listed the bad points of the people, that were the Fatimids, described them as having no faith, and spoke at length, criticizing them. He enjoined what is good and forbade what is evil. The chamberlain of the deputy ruler of Egypt, Taqi-ad-Din Umar, came to him and said, "Taqi-ad-Din conveys salams to you." Al-Khabooshani said, "Rather his name should be Shaqi-ad-Din, which means disobedient in religion. May Allah never grant him peace." Taqi-ad-Din Umar said, "He apologizes and says that there is no place where he can sell mizr." Al-Khabooshani said, "He is lying." Taqi-ad-Din Umar said, "If there is a place, show it to us." Al-Khabooshani said, "Come here." Taqi-ad-Din Umar came near, and Al-Khabooshani grabbed him by the hair and started beating him on the head, saying, "I am not a seller of mizr to know where it is sold." Then they rescued Taqi-ad-Din Umar from him. All his life, Al-Khabooshani never took a dirham from a king or from an endowment, and he was buried in the cloak that he had brought from his city. He was supported by a merchant who had come with him from his city. Al-Khabooshani died in Zulqa'dah 587 Hijri. These are the biographies of some of the scholars at the time of Salahuddin. These scholars and jurisprudents were held in high esteem by Salahuddin and were highly respected. His audiences were filled with men of knowledge and virtue. Imad mentions in this regard that he preferred to listen to hadiths with their chains of narration, and he liked the scholars with him to speak of beneficial Sharia knowledge, because he used to engage in discussions with the jurisprudents and take part in passing judgment with the judges. He became more knowledgeable than them on Sharia rulings and the evidence and foundations of these rulings. Ibn Shaddad also mentions that when he heard of a sheikh who narrated hadiths and was listened to a great deal, he would be among those who would come to him. If he, the sheikh, was one of those who could come to him, he would summon him and listen to him, and he would make those of his sons, Mamluks, and inner circle who were present listen as well. If the sheikh was one of those who did not frequent the doors of rulers and refrained from attending such gatherings, he would go to him and listen to him. Salahuddin's relationship with the Imam Qutubuddin an-Naysaburi was very strong, because Salahuddin was always discussing with the leading scholars and greatest jurisprudents whatever he needed to understand. To sum up, the scholars and jurisprudents were held in high esteem and greatly respected by Salahuddin, and received compassion, care, respect, and appreciation from him in both material and intangible terms. Their opinions were highly respected by those rulers who thought they should consult them concerning all Sharia matters that had to do with all aspects of life in the state. Indeed, those scholars and jurisprudents gained spiritual control of people's minds, and their status reached such a high level that they wielded far-reaching influence over peoples and governments. Nothing is more indicative of that than the fact that the governments handed over the reins of defense and fighting to scholars and jurisprudents such as al-Faqih Eesa al-Hakari, who excelled in matters of both religion and warfare at the time of Salahuddin. End of part 5 of chapter 4. End of chapter 4.